Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
I moved to Berkeley. I haven't been as connected to GBF, but the Gay Buddhist Fellowship is really where I found Buddhist practice. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was very immersed in working with HIV and AIDS, both in my personal life and also in the community and in my psychotherapy practice. And I had reached a certain point of emotional fatigue. And my spiritual resources that had really kind of held me together up to that point just no longer really seemed to hold much value. HIV and AIDS and the illness, suffering, and loss that occurred there were sort of a crucible that burned away so much of what I had known as kind of my spirituality and my religious upbringing. And then I kind of discovered by accident GBF, and it's given me a resource in terms of the Buddhist principles and practice that has just deepened since then. Not only in terms of dealing with suffering, but also opening more to joy. And it's really been a delight. Even when I'm not here, GBF as a community of gay men practicing together is always in my heart. At the time Queer Dharma II was being compiled, which was the second volume of Winston Leyland's sort of groundbreaking collection of works by gay men who are Buddhists talking about the practice. At that point, I was kind of struggling with a quandary in my practice, sort of a paradox, because on one hand, I had a lot of conflict around the concept of dualism. Intellectually, I was having a hard time getting dualism, and issues related to dualism were creeping into my practice. I was obsessing about whether I was doing my practice right. I felt like I was pretty bad at this Buddhist thing. I felt a lot of judgment in my own mind. And at the other side of the paradox, on the other hand, in my heart, I felt a great connectedness to non-duality as an experience, as opposed to the concept. I just felt a sort of natural extension of my way of being in the world was connected to non-dualism, a natural attitude that extended in my work and personal relationships, a tendency to perceive wholeness instead of fragmentedness, and an experience of harmony and apparent opposites, and an impulse to integrate apparent polarities. I felt a certain affinity for the concept of non-dualism as an experience. So there was this paradox of feeling on one hand especially tortured by my own dualistic good-bad thinking, while at the same time feeling a sense of being able to express and communicate a non-dualistic perspective. As I sat with this contradiction, it seemed to me that this non-dualistic capacity was connected also to my homosexuality, to my gayness. And part of what I feel about gay men and gay people in general. So just as I felt trapped in a kind of self-condemning tape loop about my failure to be a good Buddhist, I nonetheless, in my heart, seemed to express kind of effortlessly this non-judging, spacious, non-dualistic perception. And out of this dilemma came the chapter in Queer Dharma II entitled The Bad Buddhist and the Good Gay Heart. And I'll read a few sections from that. Before I begin, I also want to emphasize that I certainly don't experience that non-duality as a particularly gay characteristic. Gay people certainly don't corner the market on this experience. But I also think perhaps karmically, I don't know what the explanation is, but different of us have different kind of gifts to bring to the world, have different dharma. And I think as gay men, as gay people, part of our dharma is a certain affinity for non-dualism on one hand, while on the other hand, suffering especially under the repression of a dualistic culture. So this paradox is kind of a part of who we all are. And healing that paradox is, I think, potentially a part of our gift to the world as gay people and as gay Buddhists. So I'll just read some excerpts from the book and from my chapter. I'm a bad Buddhist. I get lazy about meditation practice. There are days and weeks at a time when my daily sitting practice, when I do sit, seems to be nothing more than either trying not to drift into sleep or getting swept away on a mental emotional roller coaster. While I deeply believe in loving kindness and nonviolence as a way of life, I sneer and bark at other drivers on the freeway, especially the ones going 50 miles an hour in the left lane. As for people who run red lights, I'm designing a hell realm especially for them. I relish the occasional steak, blood rare. While I accept that too much desire or aversion is not a good thing, I unapologetically hate bigotry of any kind, television, and slow salespeople. And as for desire, didn't someone promise that desire would naturally decrease with age and spiritual practice? Yeah, right. Contemplating the Four Noble Truths, I don't always feel so noble. It's like there's this voice inside my head that talks to me like it's talking to a big, clumsy Labrador puppy that's failing house training. Bad Buddhist, bad. While in my more spacious moments I can chuckle about this, it does create a quandary. What drew me to the Dharma in the first place was that Buddhist teachings are more about acceptance than moral judgment, more about opening to all experience rather than contracting away from whatever is wrong. While I'm sure some schools or interpreters of Buddhist words have tried to turn them into another catechism, something about the Dharma seems to dissolve this kind of hardness like water around a stone. What drew me to the Buddha's middle way is that it doesn't promote guilt and shame in the name of love. But now that old Judeo-Christian guilt was sneaking into my Buddhist practice and getting a foothold. Non-duality. It's a concept that's relatively easy to grasp intellectually, but it's difficult, especially for Westerners, to completely understand. We are so immersed in a dualistic world. It's encoded into our language so that every sentence splits or fragments experience. It is an essential part of our philosophy from Aristotle to Adam Smith to Freud. You versus me, us versus them, good versus right, right versus wrong, light versus dark, male versus female, body versus soul, heaven versus hell. Beginning in early childhood, we learn to divide and separate apples from oranges, and then later graduating to separating good little boys from bad little boys. By the time we are adolescents, we are completely programmed to perceive the world dualistically. At this point, the mind can separate, categorize, and evaluate so efficiently and automatically that we cease to be aware of it. In my own practice, I am facing the heartlessness of rigid, dualistic thinking, good versus bad, right versus wrong thinking. I recall a story told by spiritual seeker and author Mark Matuzik. He tells of meeting a close disciple and personal attendant of the late Meher Baba in India at a particularly discouraging low point after years of unsuccessfully trying to perfect himself on the spiritual path. Seeking out the wise man's advice, the seeker began to recount his failed attempts at avoiding temptation and becoming more pure. The old man interrupted him and began speaking of his beloved teacher. He said, Baba loves scoundrels. Of course, Baba loved everyone, but scoundrels were his special children. Remember, God does not need your virtue. God will take the worst of you. Never try to be too good. Nature is one of my favorite sources of the Dharma. It is a wonderful source for contemplating Buddhist teachings, including non-duality. I suppose if you lived your entire life in downtown Manhattan, this wouldn't work for you, but for a country boy like me, nature abounds in the Dharma. I can go anywhere in nature and simply observe. Give it some time for any internal chatter to fade or recede and ease into the rhythm and subtlety of nature, sound, smell, sight, sensation. Relax. Then I can contemplate non-duality. I can look around me and wonder, where are the good and bad here? Which part of nature is right and which is wrong? Which is better and which is worse? I can choose any sentient being that I see, from an insect to a tree to an animal, and observe whether it can exist separately or independently from any other sentient being. So I'm a bad Buddhist. With even just a taste of non-duality, a warmth and compassion begins to permeate all the so-called successes and failures. Zen master Hugh Neg said, "As far as Buddha nature is concerned, there is no difference between sinner and sage. One enlightened thought, and one is the Buddha, one foolish thought, and one is an ordinary person." My practice reminds me daily of my ordinariness, but at least with less inner conflict, less self-condemnation. This in itself is a kind of liberation. So that's the first part of the chapter where I introduced sort of the concept of non-duality. And then the second part, which I'll read just about 5 or 10 minutes of, I focus on how that relates to us as gay men and our community and our history as gay people. And I begin with a story from my childhood and Sunday school. I remember being in Sunday school at the age of 6 or 7, staring at this framed picture depicting a blonde, blue-eyed Jesus with lustrous hair draped over one eye and a form-fitting beige tunic. Jesus is sitting in a meadow surrounded by children, some of whom are on his lap or under his feet. The picture both fascinated me and made me feel slightly queasy, not only because it seemed fake. He's Jewish, I told my mother, like Ethan, who was one of my best friends at the time. Jesus is not supposed to look like Veronica Lake. My mother was not amused. The queasiness I felt was not so much for questioning depictions of Jesus as for believing that Jesus would never permit someone like me to sit on his lap or play at his feet. Even then I knew only good little kids get to romp in the meadows of heaven with Jesus. And little boys who like other little boys and want to get to know other little boys in the biblical sense of know were not welcome. Just going to read sections here. In my experience, gay people have a natural affinity for many of the central teachings explained in Buddhism: non-separateness, equanimity, impermanence, and especially non-duality. I don't know all of why this is true. Perhaps being outsiders, even within our own birth families, denies us the luxury of complacency and thrusts us face to face with a particular kind of loneliness. This separateness causes us to examine ourselves, our relationship to the world, and examine the assumptions that those around us seem to take for granted. Perhaps being subjects of so much irrational hatred, of bigotry that can threaten a sense of safety as well as eat away at self-worth, requires, in order to endure, finding an inner source of strength that is spiritual in nature, whether we call it that or not. But non-duality seems to be a particularly powerful quality of gay identity. It may remain mostly hidden and unacknowledged in most gay men and most aspects of gay culture. The damage of alienation and disenfranchisement is simply too great. Nonetheless, it is part of all of us, a kind of spiritual heritage, a birthright that largely remains undiscovered, the affinity for the sacred. There are clues and fragments that point us toward this aptitude in ourselves, even if we've lost touch with it altogether. Like a lost city discovered, buried under centuries of rubble, we can excavate the good gay heart. The first clue is to notice that many indigenous cultures around the world, for whom spirituality is an alive and vital part of personal experience and community life. In these cultures, the sacred quality of life is not exiled to some heaven in the sky, nor split off from the present to some future reward after we die. Instead, the sacredness is connected to the earth, to the cycles of nature, and is available each day of living in the present. We know little about these cultures, and what we do know is fractured through the dualistic lens of the Western anthropologist or archaeologist. But we do know that in some of these cultures, the views of homosexuality and gay people is quite different. In some Native American tribes, we have records of the Berdache, or more accurately translated, two spirits, one body, understanding of homosexuality. Here, gay people are not only acceptable and desirable part of village life, but also have an essential place in the spiritual traditions. Clyde Hall, the gay Native American activist of the Shoshone Metis descent, describes how gay people, from his tribal culture's perspective, play an important mediating role in the world. Gay men and women, he says, are two-spirited people. We have a very important part to play in the restoring of balance. I can't emphasize that enough. If you look at all the so-called primitive or indigenous peoples, and this goes for the ancient Europeans like the Druids, the Celts as well, their shamans were usually two-spirited people. American Indian societies are no exceptions. The two-spirit, one body give the gay person an aptitude, wisdom, and affinity for the sacred. Further, in the Dogara tribe of West Africa, gay people have a place in the culture as what's referred to as the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers are sought out for their ability to make contact with the spiritual when any tribe member is seeking wisdom, spiritual insight, or a transcendent experience. Gatekeepers among the Dogara are the guides between the ordinary and the sacred, honored for an ability to be in touch with and navigate through both the mundane and the spiritual worlds. What is interesting about both of these examples of gay people in other cultures is that they are not only accepted but honored for embodying or penetrating through to the apparent opposites, the two spirits, one body of masculine, feminine, and the gatekeepers of the spiritual versus the mundane world. In other words, as embodying or perceiving themselves, perceiving experiences that are apparently separate and divided, gay people are seen as being able to transcend dualism, masculine, feminine, spiritual, mundane, etc. Poet James Broughton recognized the spiritual lineage linked to gay people. He says, "It is a secret portrayed in Shiva, Kali, and Hermaphrodites. It is the concept of wholeness, a guide to experiencing the full range of yang and yin. It is the mystery of the total self." Author and mystic Andrew Harvey says, "God is both male and female and beyond. In a sacred world, a gay being would be seen as the living presence of that non-dual male-female character of the divine and revered as such." But we live in a modern society cut off from the sacredness. Where can we find evidence for the link between non-duality and homosexuality in modern life? The spiritual role of gay people in modern America and culture has always been vital, even if it has been mostly invisible and denied. In a secular society such as modern America, it is only through the arts, music, theater, painting, sculpture, dance, that people can seek out and discover the transcendent experience, the experience of glimpsing themselves in the world in a new and different way that refreshes and revitalizes them. Who has not experienced a film, play, song that hasn't touched them so deeply that self was forgotten? Where the separation between you and the music or the audience and the performer dissolved. These experiences exhilarate or move us, sometimes change us altogether. Most of us already know that gay people populate the arts fields in such great numbers, even if they are invisible behind the scenes or closeted, that it is not an understatement to say that without our presence, most of these fields would stagnate, if not disappear altogether. Even the ongoing wound of AIDS points to non-duality. At this current point of limited medical breakthroughs, bringing a reprieve from relentless loss, no one wants to talk about the early days of the epidemic, primarily because it touches that exhausted pain of loss. But what I remember about those days is a remarkable way our loosely knit and primarily hedonistic community pulled together with a compassion and fierceness that still leaves me in awe. Men took care of lovers and friends through the hell of progressive terminal illness with extraordinary tenderness and strength, and then often they did it again and again. People with HIV and AIDS became warriors, creating a collective strength, even as their bodies became more fragile. They took on the medical industry's apathy and greed and won decisive battles. Love and survival became a focal point for an entire community, no matter how anyone's individual HIV status might be. Everyone was awash in ongoing loss and unbearable grief, and yet, instead of hardening and pulling away, there was a softening, opening to the individual and collective broken heart as expressed in the AIDS Memorial Quilt. During this time, the central Buddhist concepts of compassion, non-separateness, and non-duality were as visible and vibrant at 18th and Castro as in any monastery. Another place where gay people seem to be on the forefront of transcending dualism is in the relationship of the body and soul. One of the foundations of Western philosophy, psychology, and religion is separation of body and soul. Here the soul contains all transcendent good qualities, while the body represents all mundane, corruptible, bad qualities. In fact, the body and its impulses are a constant threat to the soul's salvation. And yet in Buddhism, the Shinchen Ming includes this quotation: "If you would walk the highest way, do not reject the sense domain. For as it is whole and complete, the sense world is enlightenment." Much has been written about the dire consequences of this dualistic splitting of soul and body. It is inherent in the individual neurosis and collective destruction of the planet. With all that has been examined about the need for healing of this false mind-soul separation, little has been discussed about gay people's role in this healing. Oscar Wilde said, "Those who see any difference between the soul and the body have neither." Walt Whitman sang to the body electric as a love song, to the body as living and breathing embodiment of soul. Rumi spoke of viewing the body as soul work when he said, "Conventional knowledge is death to our souls. Live where you fear to live. Destroy your reputation. Be notorious." James Broughton gets even more specific, saying, "The genitals, the anus, and the perineum are the holy trinity at the root of your torso's experience. The penis is the exposed tip of the heart and the wand of the soul. The perineum animates all the chakras. The anus is a transforming and recycling volcano that fertilizes new growth. The proper activity in the temple is worship. Open your temple to love." These gay authors seem to be imagining a world where gay sexuality is recognized as a gift, not a detriment to the greater culture. These poets seem to be pointing toward physicality not as an impediment, but a path toward awakening. And universally, they are celebrating a connectedness of body and soul, how body can energize and illuminate the soul's journey. The Buddha cautioned against becoming too ensnared in attachment and desire to anything, including the body and sexuality. But his middle way equally cautions against aversion or rejection of anything, which includes the experience of the body and sexuality. The body is a practice as much as a vehicle for awakening the mind. In Queer Dharma I, poet Christian Huygens describes the Yabyum practice of Tibet. Yabyum literally refers to father-mother. Yabyum refers to any pair of male and female archetypal deities and sexual union as visualized by Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. At advanced stages of practice, the yogis visualizes himself or herself arising in the form of both deities together, thereby generating a direct, empathic, and non-conceptual experience of the blissful and passionate union of wisdom and compassion, form and emptiness. Here we see non-duality embodied in a soul-nourishing physical sexual form. In a non-dualistic world, the Dharma finds you in the most unlikely places. The gay experience in the world brings with it this capacity to embody and express a truth that transcends duality. It is a capacity that can help us heal ourselves of the alienation that comes with growing up in a homophobic, dualistic world. And it perhaps can fill the unrecognized but missing role in current Western culture of the mediator, the balance, the embodiment and expression of non-duality. In this way, the entire society can be helped to recover a sense of unity, a wholeness that transcends dualism, the us versus them animosity, which can ultimately destroy the planet. Meditation practice, contemplation, and welcoming homosexuality as an integral part of the spiritual journey can deepen the recognition of non-dualism and encourage the awakening of the good gay heart. California poet and author Trebor conveys this journey beautifully in his poem entitled Imagine. Imagine if you could fold the sky into the earth, the past into the future, hate into love. If you've been up where the rain makes the rivers, the snow melts, the stones like moons float through the sky, then you know that two men making love are re-creation and forming in their humble way the world whole and one again. Imagine that. So that's excerpts from the chapter in the second part where I make the connection between the concept of non-dualism and gayness in our culture. Any thoughts or questions? I'm curious whether anybody has, I suspect, I'll put it another way, people have kind of discovered this in their own practice. At a certain point, I'd be interested to hear other people's experiences with the non-duality and whether they sense any kind of connection with their experience as a gay man. Yeah.
I believe that it's part of the mercy of the inward path that even the experience of shame in this culture for homosexuals is an interior experience, and that enormous cavern of awfulness is still a huge spaciousness that when we comprehend our worth, we have a place to experience it. And I have found that and seen that in other people's lives, that once that they surrendered shame as their inner life, they were, it counted for something, for having suffered. I just think there's something to that shame is not wasted when it's surrendered.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. There's sort of this emptiness, right, which is emptiness which is true wisdom. And once we experience that truth, yeah, that's great. But other people, Paul.
With this media circus around this Cuban kid, I've developed a lot of aversion to the time it's being given and to the it must be causing that little kid, and an aversion to the Cubans in Miami that are doing this. And it suddenly occurred to me that in my most lefty demonstration days, I felt just as passionate as those people in Miami, in Cuba, and I would have overlooked any values other than the political value that I had at the time, whether it be mostly associated with being gay. And I thoroughly identified with the people, and I have a lot of compassion for them because their values are being fractured by this, whether or not they're my values or not. And their demonstration of their values is exactly as mine was in times that I felt radical. And I was very happy that I was aware of that non-dualism when I came to that awareness that helped me enjoy this stuff on TV a lot more.
Yes.
I was actually in Miami and experienced a lot of the energy, and I think that it's not about the boy, it's about a lot of other things. That Miami is sort of, I grew up in Miami, and Miami has had a tremendous transformation. It's happening right now, culturally, for the Jews, for the Latins, for the blacks, and the past 20 years in Miami have been a lot of culture clash and hatred, bigotry. So I see a lot of my life in that experience, it actually had a really big impact on my life, and it also connected my gayness, my Jewish background, how I practice both in my life. And I see Judaism as, for me, as something that's very close to being gay. It's dealing not with the dualism, but the many different parts of our reality.
An experience of being an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the Jewish experience as well as part of the gay experience.
And the Jews found the same sort of solstice in Leo, in the entertainment industry, fashion, the arts.
Yeah. So the other thing is thinking about, creating beauty. Something about that, the process of healing that sort of internalized shame or estrangement that creates almost an instinct, an impulse to create beauty, and that in and of itself is is practicing non-dualism, whether you realize it or not. And that's true in the cinema and in the field of the arts, music. Anybody else have any thoughts or feelings about their experience of non-dualism in their practice? Yes.
I guess what I'm struck by this morning thinking about that is thinking about how, coming to terms with my own sexuality and coming out to others, there seems to be a real hunger for non-duality, because I know when I've come out to others about anything in my life that people may have judgment about, be it my sexuality or anything else, if I can come out to them in a non-judgmental way, in a way that clearly shows I accept this part of myself and embrace it, that's what they seem most drawn to. They just seem like, oh, can you really do that? Is that okay? There seems to be a real hunger for finding a non-shame-based identity. And I think that's a real gift that we can't share.
So then, in liberating yourself from that, you create a space for other people to be free from whatever their secret is. Yeah.
My experience with reality has to do with, I think, the nature of Buddhism, which is to become awake to the way things really are, as opposed to the way things seem. And pragmatically, in my experience, having come out relatively late to recognize that the essential being gay or straight or bi or whatever is just not the point. Culturally, however, though, it is such a big deal. And duality is by its definition divisive. And I realized how fundamentally unimportant whatever your gay or straight nature is. It has to do more with who each individual person is, that temporary collection of feelings and thoughts. And in former incarnations, just in this lifetime, have been very very divisive and very black and white, very decisive and critical. And that is so exciting. It's so exciting point too. And so I think in coming to terms with being gay, it's really enlightened me a lot about the nature of duality and what a sidetrack, if not dead end, is. So it's a blessing, I think, being gay, because you have two perspectives about seeing things the way they really are.
Yes. Puts you right up against your judging mind. Puts me right up against my judging mind. Yes. It becomes, imperative to decrease quite an acute sense of suffering that begins to soften and evolve, and that practice really creates a space for non-duality to live.
Well, I'm sort of intrigued about the two spirits in one body, because I think culturally and socially, oftentimes we feel like we don't belong in either camp. We're not, easily fitting into the world of women or the world of men, as that is culturally defined. And when you stop to think about it, I think for a lot of us, what we discover is sort of that the opposite is true, which is that we can be fluid and move in and out of those worlds which have, because of social reasons, if you're born straight as a man or as a woman, and you adhere to the rules that go along with that, then there's a whole part of the world which you don't have access to, which you're not supposed to have access to, which is weird if you want access to. So you learn to stay in one of the two corners of that duality. And I know I'm always so pleasantly surprised at the friendships that I have with straight women. And I've thought about, why is that? Is it simply that I don't represent a sexual threat to them, and so we can become friends. But I'm always tickled when straight women, call me or talk to me and want to know, why do men do that kind of stuff? It's like you really have the sense that you are this liaison, this bridge of these two worlds, and not just because you both like men and you both have to deal with, can't live with them and can't live without them and all that stuff, but sort of having one foot in each camp. And it's an incredible, I just treasure the moments that happens, and it makes me realize that I have really the best of both worlds instead of having neither world.
Yeah, sort of embodying the healing of the split between genders, the world of genders, and the estrangement that's happened there. I've experienced that in counseling couples. I really enjoy counseling heterosexual male-female couples, and experience that. Sometimes they say, well, because I'm out, they say, how could you as a gay man kind of really understand where we're coming from? And I say, well, let's talk about that and just kind of sit with me for a session. Let's see what happens. But there is that quality of having an affinity for the feminine experience and understanding that on a core level, and also growing up as a man. And so kind of understanding that and bridging that gap.
First of all, thank you for your speech. Stir up a lot of things, and I feel very chaotic inside sometimes. But I work in an environment of teaching in college, and I'm very open. And I have a colleague who's a really bulldozer dyke, and there's no way she can hide that. And she speaks very frequently about a relationship that broke up. She just talked about this female friend, and they have a daughter together. And I like the freedom she gives this expression of it as a female. She doesn't even apologize about it. And then we had a straight who just broke up with his wife after 2 years of marriage. And I realized when we were all three talking, we were talking about love and pain and suffering and love. And I've talked about how difficult it has been for me sometimes, breaking up with people I care about. I'm here with three people. Gay guy, a dyke, or a lesbian, and a straight man, and we talk about the same thing.
And this is just incredible. We're just sitting there chatting along, and the pain and the suffering go ahead in different ways. And that was very, very powerful, very powerful. What I enjoy about my job, and I have to say, because bring this up as male female, and I really enjoy doing it, and I think I provoke doing it, but I do it. And I feel good about it, is that when the students express themselves creatively, because there is an art college I teach, I say, I want you to get in touch with the male and the female side inside yourself. I say there's nothing more boring than I see a piece of artwork made by a woman, and you can tell it's made by a woman. It's all pastel and soft and flowers and buttons. The same thing with the male. I say there's something boring about this macho, straight, square kind of look. And I say you have to get in touch with both of them. And I see the smile on their faces or their palms or something. But I enjoy doing it.
Certainly the experience of emotional androgyny is so much part of who we are as gay men and as lesbian women. And certainly we don't corner the market on it, but it becomes kind of acute for us because we're attracted to the same sex also. It makes me sad looking at our community and how hard we work to belong to a club that is trying to be more like us in some ways. You know, it's in the 80s, the straight men would go off on men's gathering and kind of bang drums and hold hands and learn how to be emotionally close to other men. And this is something we know how to do already, at least a lot of us do. And yet there's a struggle that we have, a shame-based struggle to try to belong to that club, and as opposed to embracing our androgyny.
I think the commercialism of homosexuality has done a lot of damage to it, because we feel more like we have to belong to this club that the marketing teams of the world feel that this is what it means to be gay, because it isn't. It's not about, penises, and it's about emotion, it's about physicality, it's about a lot of different levels of looking at life, And before that market was brought out, it seemed to flow a lot easier. Being gay was some mystical sort of quality.
Yeah, a little bit broader spectrum.
Yeah.
We should stop here. Thank you again, Mark. It was just a joy to hear you.
Pleasure to be here.
See, I'm also opposed to the standard announcements, opposed to something like, there's a Dharma bowl out there, and please be generous. The operations, the overheads of GBF, the mailings, the rental of this space, vacations in Mexico for that day. No, the donations that you give for the newsletter and out here are the only way we can keep going, so readers will be appreciated. There'll be tea out there, and if you use a cup, please wash it and put it away. Please put the mats and the pillows back there. I'll be happy if anyone has any questions about the organization to refer you to somebody else. Are there any other announcements that I forgot that anyone would want to make?
I don't know if it's an announcement. There's a letter out there from someone from, I think, Greenland that's stating he'd like to start some sort of group or know how to do it, who to contact. And on it's written, does anyone want to answer this? Do you know what that's all about? Is that going to go to the steering committee to answer, or?
I don't know. I just inadvertently put it out there when I emptied the box.
Okay.
So I don't know whether someone who is, working as one of the administrators here inadvertently left that, or whether that is open to the fellowship to answer that letter. But
Go ahead and take a look if you want. Apparently, wouldn't hurt.
There'll be a steering committee meeting the second Tuesday of the month at 7:30 at my place. My name is Larry White. And anybody who's interested can talk to me about it afterwards. And we, as usual, we need people to volunteer, and that's the main place. And I can talk to you about the letter.
People who haven't done any committee work like myself, please listen to these announcements. And move them spirited.
Bad
I would like to thank Lee for hosting a fabulous spotlight last night. More people should come. They're lots of fun. And also, I'm sure that he's telephoned everyone, but the first meeting of the Buddhist singing group is Wednesday evening, so you don't want to be in it and don't know the details.
Is that on one of the handouts outside?
I don't have them out there, but I have them at home.
Is it in the calendar or anything like that? Buddhist singer seats next.
Why me, I don't know, but I got an email from somebody in Switzerland who was looking for an article by Thich Nhat Hanh on Buddhism, and she thought it was she was writing an article on it, and she thought it was something like God is a black lesbian or something of the sort. So if anybody is, I don't know anything about it. It was something by Thich Nhat Hanh on gayness or lesbianness. Let me know and I'll pass it on to his music.
Remains enlightened, but I guess
I had an announcement about event next week, and Mama Tarshan, her day's coming to San Francisco. Actually, Oakland Friday night, and next Saturday, he's doing a day of meditation instruction. So I just
and could you give us a sense about who he is?
He's a Tibetan Dzogchen teacher. Actually, the Hebrews Fellowship retreat was held at the
Okay, let's close. By this practice, may I find peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering. May all my Sangha brothers in this room find peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering. Everyone in the Bay Area find peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering. May all people and all sentient beings in the universe find peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.